So time doesn't exist, so how come my hair keeps going white? Our next speaker is Roger J. Anderton. Roger's a retired, I think I can say retired, is that okay? Yeah, you're retired, okay. Some people get a bit uppity. Telecommunications engineer with a degree in maths and physics. His fields, if I break them down, I've got to read them out really, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong. But special and general relativity in discussion, electromagnets, gravitational physics, quantum field theory, that's the big one, and quantum mechanics, I got a bit of that in my degree, theoretical particle physics and high energy physics. So there's an awful lot there for you to cover. So anyway, I welcome to the stage Roger J. Anderton.
So how do I hold that without turning it all off? It's all on. Like that. It's all on. Thank you. Cheers. Right, here we go. So the other people have covered the basics, and I'm going to cover a few things which they might have missed out, and then after this tea break it's going to just go deeper down the rabbit hole. So with aliens, a bit closer to the mic, is that okay? So I'm going to go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, starting from where the other people have left off. So Einstein's relativity has diverted physics on the wrong track. So you've got these other things like quantum field theory, quantum mechanics, and all of that seems to start from what Einstein is talking about, and things just get worse. They just go on the completely wrong track about these things. But it starts with Einstein's relativity. So here I am in British Telecom magazine back in 1998, and at that time I was believing relativity, and I was showing my spaceship, which I brought with me today, if I can reach it. So here's my spaceship. I still called it Enterprise. So basically a lot of the Einstein's physics, his relativity is being incorporated into what Star Trek deals with, so it's sort of like Star Trek physics. Next. So I've gone on various courses dealing with relativity. I've had a degree in it and so forth, but my observations going on these different courses is they keep modifying the theory of relativity. So I've looked at it from a physics education point of view. They don't stick rigidly to what Einstein says in 1905 when he started his theory of relativity, and they just keep making modifications to it. And so I went into a competition at British Telecom dealing with relativity at one time. I think it's the one that says that. So it's sort of like, at one time I thought, Zen explains relativity. So I gave a talk upon Zen and relativity. And I did give a talk at where I'm from, at Southampton University, on my researches into Einstein's unified field theory back in 2006. And I did appear, what was on the radio, BBC Radio, and I think they censored me because it was talking about conspiracies. So there seems to be a block on people having these contrary views to Einstein's relativity. And so I'm a bit of a nerd, and people at work and that sort of notice that. So I end up here as the Christmas tree when it came to Christmas time. So I've been studying the literature on Einstein for a very long time, so I've got really deep insight into it of how the theory has been modified a lot. And there are articles that turn up saying that Einstein's wrong, such as this example here, but what they seem to be talking about is the problem of trying to combine relativity with quantum physics. And this is the famous discussion between Niels Bohr and Einstein about quantum physics, because Einstein did not believe in quantum physics, and you can portray quantum physics as being about playing a game of chance, rolling a dice. And so Einstein summarized it as God does not play dice with the universe, which he thought quantum physics was saying. And Niels Bohr counters back to him, don't tell God what he can do. Don't tell God what he can and can't do. So Einstein, so he managed to undermine Einstein at that time, who was objecting against quantum physics. But they dethroned him on that, but they still have him on the throne as being the top man for relativity. So this is where it all started. Back in 1919, Einstein was supposed to have predicted that starlight would bend, and it was supposed to be observed by Eddington, and it ended up in all the sort of like newspapers that Einstein had dethroned Newtonian physics and now replaced it with relativity. So what happens is that Einstein gets protected for relativity theory because it's his own pet theory, and it's what his genius rests on. And the mainstream allows it to be said that Einstein was wrong about quantum physics, but it carries on protecting Einstein for his pet theory. So I was into that for a long time, that relativity was wrong. And then I found a group attacking relativity, and it was the Chappell Natural Philosophy Science Society, CNPS. Originally it was called the Natural Philosophy Alliance, NPA, but it changed its name because there was a lot of infighting going on. And so this is the person taken as causing the foundation of the Chappell Natural Philosophy Society. It's John E. Chappell Jr., who's unfortunately now passed away. If we go back to the original time when Einstein became famous, there was lots of people saying that Einstein was wrong. And this book came out, it was in German, and it says 100 authors against Einstein. So there was a big upset about the scientist at the time. So anyway, the dissident group that sprung up since then did have managed to attend a conference in mainstream physics where they expressed their views. And here's the group of people, and some of them are what are called neo-Newtonians, which is new versions of Newtonian physics. They were believing still in Newtonian physics, but a new version of it, and they're opposed to relativity. And so they were at this mainstream physics meeting. So what we have is those who are pro-Einstein's relativity and those anti-Einstein's relativity, i.e. those who think it's wrong. And I'm going to try to balance out both points of view with those anti, those anti say with those that are pro. Those pros say try to naturally censor the anti-voice as much as they can. And of course the defence they usually come up with is that if you're anti, then you're anti-Jewish. And that was the main problem back when Einstein first became famous in 1919, if you started saying Einstein's relativity is wrong because Einstein was Jewish, you were then looked upon suspiciously as being anti-Semite. So you were up against the publicity at the time. So as we've seen this morning, I've shown now the film Einstein Wrong, which came out of our group, the Chappell Natural Philosophy Society. So now let's get down to the physics. So the main idea is ether, and it can be spelled in various different ways. And the idea is that there's a medium for light to travel through. And so the main man who was on ether physics was a Tesla, and he was considered a genius. And hopefully many of you know about Tesla. He's sort of like he came up with claims about building the death ray. He invented the AC electrical network, and he's made lots of incredible discoveries. And so at the time he was considered a genius, and then Einstein came along, and what Tesla was saying was then taken as supposedly wrong. So you had Tesla based on ether physics, then Einstein comes along and he seemed to be saying there's no ether, so they discard what Tesla is saying, and that's in the mainstream. So let's look at what Tesla says about Einstein's relativity. And this is supposed to be what Tesla says about Einstein's relativity. Unfortunately, it comes from an unpublished source. He's supposed to have said this to a journalist, but it did not get published. And what Tesla says, Einstein's relativity work is a magnificent mathematical garb which fascinates, dazzles, and makes people blind to the underlying errors. The theory is like a beggar clothed in purple, whom ignorant people take for a king. Its proponents are brilliant men, but they are metaphysicians rather than scientists. And so that's basically what it is. It dazzles Einstein's relativity dazzles people with all its claims about black holes, space-time, and twin paradox and everything else, and it discards the idea of ether, which Tesla's physics was based upon. And so I've written it out again there, if you couldn't read it in the original. So basically, he was disagreeing with Einstein's relativity because there was no ether in that theory. And so unfortunately, some people would argue against that quote because they can start saying maybe it's not an accurate quote because it was unpublished. And the main area of conflict between Tesla physics and Einstein physics is that Tesla has ether and Einstein in 1905 didn't. Light is a wave, and as a wave should have a medium, which gets called ether. And Tesla and Einstein's physics of 1905 seems to be denying that. And this is the paper where Einstein first started relativity. It was published in 1905, and there's nothing said there about it being a relativity theory or anything. He just says about on the electrodynamics of moving bodies, and subsequently became known as special relativity. And in that paper he says the introduction of a luminous ether as a medium for light to travel through will prove to be superfluous, inasmuch as the view here to be developed will not require an absolutely stationary space provided with special properties. And that seems to be where the mainstream gets the idea that there is no ether, and then credits it to Einstein. However, if you see what Einstein later says, such as in 1922, he seems to be saying there is an ether, and he says recapitulating, we may say that according to general theory of relativity, space is endowed with physical qualities. In this sense, therefore, there exists an ether. So he seems to be switching his ideas. Originally he seems to be saying there's no ether, then he changes his mind and says there is. So 1905, Einstein says no ether. 1920, he seems to change his mind, but the mainstream seems to stick with what Einstein said in 1905, and you can always change your mind. Thus, my experience, they teach there is no ether. So the mainstream just seems to get Einstein to say what they want him to say. They want him to say there's no ether, and so they go by what he says in 1905 and try to ignore what he later says. So mainstream just has this nasty habit of using Einstein as a mouthpiece and getting Einstein to say what they want him to say. So here's a quote from Einstein. I never said half the crap people said I did. So basically, it's a joke quote. It's not a real quote. And he's trying to point out in this joke that Einstein is being used to say things which he didn't really say. And that's how mainstream messes up physics. They have Einstein versus Tesla, and they get Einstein to say there's no ether. So it's no ether physics versus an ether physics. And so in the ether physics, there is free energy, contact with aliens, anti-gravity, etc., etc. But the mainstream starts denying all that sort of thing, and treats all those things as unproven speculations and wrong. So in the area of alternative physics as opposed to mainstream physics, there are books like this about ether physics, and this one about ether technology is endorsed by Edward D. Mitchell, who was an astronaut who went on the moon, and it says it's at the bottom, the underground classic is back in print, so it's underground physics. So we have this annoying split between mainstream physics and alternative stroke distant physics over this ether issue, with Einstein being forcibly used to endorse the idea there is no ether. It's a breakdown in communication where one side cannot talk to the other. Anyway, that now brings us to my perspective on Einstein's relativity, and from my investigations on Einstein's relativity, it has not been translated properly from German into English. And so there's this film with Bill Murray that emphasizes the problem in translating what is said from one language into another language, and it's said lost in translation. So supposedly things like can't appreciate Shakespeare properly unless go from the original English it's written in, and supposedly Toy Story's War and Peace was improved upon when it was translated into English from Russian. So when these people translate from one language into another language, they don't do it literally or properly. They try to improve upon the original version. And so I say Einstein's theory is a much different theory in the German from what has been translated to in the English. I.e., in the usual English translation, which is handed out to people, a much better translation attempt could have been made. Ideally, what is known as a translation problem should have been taken into account by physicists when translating Einstein from German into English, but it wasn't.
We've got a similar problem in the Bible. You've got the original languages in which the Bible was written, then you've got the problem of how it's translated in English, and then people go off on lots of different tangents about that. But you've got the same sort of problem with Einstein's relativity. What is being said in the German is not necessarily the same as what it's translated to in English. So there's this physicist, Arnold, so-and-so Sommerfeld, and he seems to be the main man behind how Einstein's theory was translated from German into English. Since Einstein, I think this is an accurate quote, and he says, "Since the mathematicians invaded the theory of relativity, I do not understand it myself anymore." So you've got what Einstein originally wrote, 1905, and then the people he's referring to as mathematicians have come along and then changed the theory. So the English comprehension of Einstein's theory, it was messed up. And so what about the mathematics of the theory? Well, as many have noticed, and that's been highlighted a bit in the previous things shown, the mathematics has been messed up. And so I've got an example of Stephen B. Bryan, who's looked at the mathematics in Einstein's 1905 paper, and he's also a member of the John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society, and he's pointed out that you seem to end up with saying that 1 equals 0 when you work through the mathematics that Einstein has presented. So Einstein is thus a mixture of good and bad things. Einstein's mathematics is a mess, but it has its defenders who say otherwise. While his good ideas he copies from others, and then he gets accused of plagiarism. And so go for an example of that. So this person, in this article, Richard Moody, accuses Einstein of plagiarizing things. And the problem there is that when Einstein wrote his papers, he doesn't give references to where he gets his ideas from. So when you sort of like read Einstein and you're aware of people earlier who were saying the same sort of thing, well, it sounds like plagiarism when you haven't acknowledged that people were saying something similar in the past. It then becomes an issue of how can Einstein be defended. He does have a very loyal following, fan base, try defending him from all accusations. The reason is because of politics. Politics corrupted science physics when Einstein came along. His fans believe this publicity. Einstein, the genius who revolutionized physics. So Einstein is believed to be have revolutionized physics from his fans. But Einstein has a dark side that is usually not known about very much because it does not get much publicity. The thing that usually gets concentrated on is his good side, and he did do good things, like he did oppose the atom bomb and things like that. But one of the things that you kind of query is that Einstein was involved in political assassinations. And so Einstein's letter of 1917 was defending a friend who actually did a political assassination. Einstein was basically a political activist, and he was involved in attacking Hitler before Hitler and people like him. And so when he went to America, the Americans just thought he was a communist. So Einstein was fleeing from Hitler and the Nazis, went to America, and the FBI thought, well, he's a communist. And they opened a massive page file on him looking into what he was up to. And so one of the things that's interesting, one of his girlfriends, he had lots of girlfriends, was a Russian spy. And so that's sort of like interesting. So was he unwittingly pulled into the spy ring? A lot of the fans see themselves as aligning with what Einstein's political beliefs were, and so he then becomes a hero that they will defend in physics, no matter what, because of their political ideology. And that's what I'm pointing out, that this science then becomes a political issue. Einstein's claim to fame comes through physics. He's declared to be a genius in that, so they see that as justification for his political ideas. Einstein's a genius, therefore what he says about politics, he must also be a genius for saying. So there's a lot of weird things around Einstein that keep coming out. In this one, it's reported that Einstein went out to see the aliens at, I think it was probably Roswell, and so he was aware of the UFO cover-up. But how reliable is such a claim? And it's supposed to come out from a person who was working for him, that then revealed that Einstein was aware of the aliens and UFOs and things. And then another thing that comes up is about his first wife. They were students together studying physics, and so people think that maybe she contributed to Einstein's physics papers. So she was either a co-worker with him on physics, or she was actually the one who had most of the ideas. So another things that come out is sort of like Einstein was a misogynist. And the problem with that point of view is that we're looking at things from our modern perspective, and the behaviour he had with women back in at that time, the early 20th century, well, many of the men were acting that way. So it's from a modern perspective that he's looked at as a misogynist, whereas at the time he probably wouldn't have been looked at that way. And now we get back to the physics again. This is the physics experiment. It is supposed to have started Einstein's relativity, because it's the Michelson-Morley experiment of 1887. But there are articles around in the dissident community pointing out the Michelson-Morley experiment is being misrepresented and there is a cover-up. And for example, this one, the 21st Century Science and Technology magazine, writes that the Michelson-Morley and Miller with the cover-up. There's just a cover-up. So the supposed foundation for Einstein's relativity is not there from the point of view of us dissidents. So going back to the old poor Galileo, he went before the Inquisition, and what he brought to attention was that should pay more attention to experiments and observations, but authorities of his day didn't like their authority being undermined, and they sort of like, I put Galileo under house arrest, and I think they banned his book as well. But next came now authorities of our day also don't like to be undermined, and they've found a better way to deal with things. So when the empirical evidence goes against them, they just misrepresent it. So it does not undermine their authority. So experiments are being misrepresented. So it's still an ongoing thing of trying to suppress dissent. Galileo dissented, they tried to suppress him, and now the authorities have found better ways of suppressing dissent within science. There's numerous examples of the mainstream misrepresenting empirical evidence. A mainstream likes to say that GPS works by Einstein's relativity. And as pointed out in the film, Einstein Wrong, the expert on GPS, Ron Hatch, pointed out that's wrong. Einstein's GPS does not really work on Einstein's relativity. And we've had other things like this. It's Holton Arp. He's considered a modern day Galileo. He made astronomical observations, and they don't fit in with what the mainstream wants to believe, so they try ignoring him. So here's another one on our modern day Galileo, which is Holton Arp. Arp makes astronomical observations that the mainstream does not like. Same as when Galileo made astronomical observations which the establishment didn't like. And what's the response? Just ignore him. So I think the problem goes to the scientific method, and this is the scientific method as an ongoing process. And you make observations, think of interesting questions, formulate hypotheses, and develop testable predictions. You just go along in this circle. But when you get to this point here, it's in this little box circle, you refine, alter, or expand or reject hypotheses. When the mainstream gets to this box, they just seem to bodge things to fit with their theories. So you've got some data and it doesn't quite fit your theory, but you just then bodge that data to fit your theory. You don't actually get to a stage of rejecting the theory, namely Einstein's relativity. You just keep bodging things. So the main philosopher of science, where they seem to use, is this person who wrote the book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn. And according to him, and he argued that science does not evolve gradually towards truth. Science is a paradigm that remains constant before going through a paradigm shift when current theories can't explain some phenomenon and sometimes proposes a new theory. So basically the idea is scientists rigidly stick to a theory, resist trying to overthrow that theory, and then only if they're really, really pushed to reject that theory and they've got no other options, do they then reject the theory and replace it with another theory. And changing to another theory is a scientific revolution. So based upon that way of looking at science, the people who believe in relativity are rigidly sticking to believing in it no matter what. And so you've got these people like this, Carl Sagan, who makes claims, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And so, my point of view is, it's extraordinary that when we look at what Einstein said and what the mainstream falsely claims that Einstein said, Einstein says there's an ether, but mainstream falsely says that Einstein says otherwise. So the evidence is extraordinary in my point of view, that they're actually managing to get Einstein to say things which he didn't really say. But despite that, the mainstream ignores the evidence. So the general pattern of what seems to happen is some sort of dogma, false belief that mainstream chooses to enforce, and they then ignore evidence to the contrary. After a while, often for some unknown reason, the dogma collapses and is replaced by another dogma. The false beliefs being imposed onto Einstein's relativity in attempts to save it and enforce the dogma does get noticed, and some people realise there are myths of relativity. And I'm giving an example of this. This is pointed out in a physics education journal. It points out two myths about special relativity. And so one of the myths is the Lorentz transformation reduces to Galilean transformation when the ratio V divided by SP is small. And that's normally what is taught to people when they're being taught relativity, that the bit of math called the Lorentz transformation reduces to the bit of math called the Galilean transformation when V divided by V is small. But that is a myth. So actually the physics students are being taught myths. And the article then goes on to point out that being taught to physics students is a myth. And the second myth is the phrase, constancy of the speed of light. And that's another thing that's taught to physics students. And it points out what Einstein meant by the constancy of the speed of light means something different to what is now taught. So they've changed the meaning of that phrase. And it's what I call wordplay. So now getting on to the issue of word games. And people who believe in relativity play lots of word games. Picking, for example, this lady who's a physicist and points out her qualifications there. She has a blog and she says, was Einstein wrong, question mark? No, his theories are simply incomplete. So she's saying that Einstein's not wrong, it's just his theories are incomplete. So she answers no to saying that Einstein is wrong. But let's look at the dictionary a bit. And really, the word incomplete means wrong. So she's playing word games with us. She's refusing to say Einstein's wrong. Instead, she wants to say Einstein is incomplete. But really, both things, wrong and incomplete, mean the same thing. So that's the sort of word games they play with us, these physicists, when they talk about Einstein's relativity. And the main thing, as far as I'm concerned, where Einstein's relativity is incomplete is on the issue of the ether. So back to that. You do sometimes get articles that come out, like such as this one, and it points out a new scientist, Einstein killed the ether. Now the idea is back to, say, relativity. So it's proposing to bring the ether back, and it's proposing that the ether should be part of relativity. So you've got all these people saying there's no ether because of relativity, and next minute they want to change the theory and have the ether back in it. So this is another one where it says about it. Close up is return of the ether. Einstein killed it, but now it's back to save relativity. So have Einstein physics versus Tesla physics. Einstein physics, we have Einstein falsely denying ether, and Tesla physics where there is an ether. Given now that the mainstream can get Einstein to say whatever they like, and recognising that it's false information, one of the things said is that there's no unified field theory, and that's false as well. So when I checked up on this, I found that Einstein was working from earlier sources, and one of those main sources was this Catholic priest in the 18th century, and he proposed theory of everything back in the 18th century, and Einstein was working from that. And even in the history of physics journals, they point out that there was a theory of everything before Einstein came along, and it was this person is referring it to as a Victorian theory of everything. And so Einstein was really working on these ideas, even though you might disagree with them, what he did with those ideas. Before Einstein came on the scene, physicists were working on a theory of everything, which was basically to try to work out the mathematics for Bolszewicz's theory. When Einstein came on the scene, came on the scene, that persuaded mainstream to abandon that approach as a unified theory, with their thinking they needed something different. And the word quantum is pointed out as a Latin word, and really Bošković was talking about quantum physics, and that was in the 18th century. So quantum physics was really supposed to be invented in the 20th century, but actually you've got this person talking about it in the 18th century. So you think, and that may leave some people to think, Bošković was a time traveller. How can he be talking about quantum physics in the 18th century when it was not invented until the 20th century? So the way they've messed up physics makes it look like there's time travel going on. And this is one of the books I've helped bring out with my friend Dragoslav about Bošković. And Dragoslav gives a video on Bošković's theory, and he points out how you get from Bošković's theory to modern quantum theory. So the issue becomes, why has there been such a mess being allowed to happen in physics? And the answer must be to cover up things that are portrayed as fantasy and not reality. Mainstream does not want us to realise such things as, for instance, there's sufficiently advanced ET races fairly easy for them to get here. And I got my spaceship with me here. So basically, a lot of this physics has been presented to us as fantasy. If you get it from Star Trek. So this is how mainstream just manages to keep sweeping certain things under the carpet. Thank you. The end. Right. Next part we go weirder with the aliens.
Thanks, Roger. Do you think the word special is being used to protect Einstein?
Special?
Special. Because that word keeps popping up.
Yeah.
Could you explain what you...
Well, the first, Einstein's got two theories, whereas mainstream says he's got two theories of relativity. When you look into it, it gets more complicated. But they talk about special relativity, and that was published in 1905, and then later he went on to try to bring gravity and so forth into it and acceleration, and then it became, the next theory was general relativity, which was published in 1915, I believe, or 1916. So part of it is they managed to confuse things between the two theories, special and general relativity. Special relativity can say one thing, and then suddenly when you go to general relativity, it can say something else. So there's confusion between the transition between the two theories. And if you go to Einstein's writing, he has a transition theory between special and general relativity, and I think it was 1911. And there's a Dr. Utzinger thinks that is the proper theory, and what he did later was wrong. So you've got all this arguing over how to interpret Einstein. It's just confusing.